Formula One. 5 Live's Checkered Flag podcast.
Hello, I'm Rosanna Tennant and welcome to the paddock here in Melbourne. With me to preview the Australian Grand Prix is BBC Sports chief F1 writer Andrew Benson and Australian former racing driver turned F1 reporter Sam Power. Great to have you both alongside me in what's always a beautiful Australian paddock, but I feel a bit weird. I think I'd got so used to the Australian Grand Prix being the season opener that it's weird coming here now, Andrew, knowing really where the teams stack up.
It is slightly surreal. It's always slightly surreal coming to Australia because you have the whole 24-hour flight, then the time difference change. I was walking in the track today. I've got a little route that I take in. There's a little sort of mini bit of bush that you can come in along Canterbury Road here, and you can smell the eucalyptus leaves as you walk through there. But yeah, we all know where we stand. Red Bull are miles ahead of everybody else. And I think normally in an Australian Grand Prix weekend you wouldn't have that knowledge, and that made it that extra bit special to come here. But it's always special to come to Melbourne because it's such a wonderful city and everybody just loves being here.
Yeah, I think it really is loved by everyone. We all enjoy it, even though it is such a long journey. We love coming to Melbourne. But controversially now, Sam, obviously Melbourne is not your hometown, Adelaide is. But do you still love coming here? Can you still get on board the Melbourne hype train?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just special for Australian sport. You know, we embrace sport here as a culture, as a community. Arguably, well, I mean, I'm biased, probably it's the best in the world. You know, we have it growing up everywhere. The access to sport in the community is huge. So I think it's just one of those events that puts the country on the map, and we're incredibly proud to have it.
And of course, still got skin in the game when it comes to Australian drivers. We'll talk about Oscar Piastri shortly, but we've already had action on track. Sitting up in the media centre, looking out onto the start-finish straight, the pit lane has been stacked all day. We've had people going up and down, looking in the garages, and we've had track action. They are filling this race weekend from start to finish.
Yeah, we definitely like doing that in Australia. I mean, when you race in the junior series, you know, when you're going around with the supercars, for example, they're slotting in every single bit of track time they can possibly get from sun up to sundown in some cases, and it's just spectacular. And we follow the same principle here in the Australian Grand Prix, so it's great to see support categories that I've raced in, and particularly Porsche Carrera Cup, who I'm very fond of. So it's great for everyone to feel connected also to international motorsport, and that's a big thing for Australian motorsport.
And a big thing, I was talking to Andrew Westacott as we kind of got into this morning's activities. He was saying with F2 and F3 here as well, Andrew, there's a real sense of kind of seeing all of motorsport, F1, F2 and F3 all alongside each other for the first time in Australia. Yeah,
that's the head of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation you're referring to there. Yeah, they make a really big effort in Melbourne, and it does make for a great weekend. It's packed. Sometimes, Sam, they used to have the Formula One two-seater running.
Yes,
It was like an old style V10 engine.
Car. Yep.
Yeah, and
Didn't
it would
crash here on Friday the 13th, 2020?
A few years ago, yeah.
The worst day in Formula One
that was
history.
just the craziest weekend. Not weekend, as it turned out. Yeah, and they would run it from like 7:30 in the morning, and even in St Kilda, where a lot of us stay, which is it's like a good half-hour walk from the track. You would get woken up by this thing going around Albert Park, which like people would like.
It's better than an alarm clock, mate. You've got to be honest.
You didn't want your alarm clock that early was the problem. Are they still doing that this weekend? I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether I heard it today or not.
No, not the two-seater. They're doing rides here. So part of Australian motorsport, we try and get as many people involved as we obviously can, giving the rides in these amazing race cars, particularly the Australian GT Championship, Porsche Carrera Cup, gives the opportunity for the fans to sit in the car, experience what it's like. It's one of the few sports you can do that. You know, you could play tennis against Roger Federer, but you can't ever feel what Roger Federer does to hit a backhand or a forehand, and that's the advantage that motorsport has. So we love doing that.
I feel like Andrew's had sensory overload since landing here. You've got the smell of the eucalyptus. You're thinking you're hearing Formula One cars, two-seaters go around the track. Are you okay?
I definitely heard something this morning going around the track.
Was it me and my hairdryer? We're next to each other in the hotel. I was worrying I was waking up Andrew.
I am feeling slightly hallucinatory at the moment, but I think that is part of coming to Australia on your first. I arrived last night. Your first day in Australia, you always feel slightly out there. Hopefully I'll come back down to earth again.
I was going to ask, mate, which pub did you go to last night then?
Just a few flat whites will set you right. Well, I'm going to confuse you even further, Andrew, because I want to look back at Saudi briefly before we really get into the Australian Grand Prix. because there was confusion. The checkered flag fell. We thought Fernando Alonso had taken his 100th podium. Then he was penalised, went to 4th. Then suddenly we wake up in the morning. Well, actually, it was before I went to bed, but a few other colleagues while we were out in Saudi had gone to sleep, woke up in the morning, and suddenly it had all changed again. What did you make of those hours that followed the race? And is it good for F1 that there's this much confusion?
I think they made a bit of a mess of it, didn't they, the stewards? It's shown up actually a situation that has developed this year where the drivers can't really see what they're doing when they approach their grid positions. It's to do with the size of the wheels in these cars, which changed last year, not for this year, but seems to be something about this year that's made it even harder. They're talking about having to look to the side to see where they have to stop, and the grid positions weren't wide enough, or were wide enough for the car but only just. And so, as Fernando Alonso was saying this earlier today, to have two drivers make the same mistake on 2 consecutive races, something's not quite right, although both him and Esteban Ocon, who was the guy who made the same mistake in Bahrain, accept that it was a mistake. But look, no one likes to see a situation where one guy crosses the line in 3rd, then he gets demoted to 4th, and then he gets re-promoted back to 3rd again. Him and George Russell have kind of laughed about it a bit. Russell was saying today that he found out from Fernando at the airport. He was the first person who told him that he'd lost 3rd again, having got it in the first place, having got it from Alonso. They both, I think Russell accepts that it was Alonso who deserved it, but it's not a position Formula One really wants to be in. And I guess it's just another underlining of the situation that's been going on for quite some time now, where there's a few wrinkles in the way race control is run and organised, which the FIA are trying to get on top of, but they're still in the process of getting on top of it. They haven't finalised it.
Yeah, and we saw the trophy being delivered back, didn't we, to Aston Martin, Sam. Mercedes making light, perhaps, of a situation, as you say, Andrew, which is actually quite serious. We need to know where we're at. But they delivered the trophy back to Aston Martin, the rightful owners of 3rd place in Saudi Arabia. But we talk about bringing new fans into the sport. We want everybody to enjoy this. It can't be this technical, can it?
No, yeah, look, I mean, it's a tough thing. When the regulations are written, they're written with the best intentions, and sometimes these things do come out in the sense that we didn't necessarily think that this would capture it, or it would be interpreted in that way, or that we needed to apply it that strictly. And you've got to take all of these things into consideration. I think the first and foremost thing is the right decision was made to give it back. I thought it was a bit harsh, but maybe it's also a chance to actually look at some opportunity and go, as Andrew was saying, if it's too narrow in terms of the grid box, why don't we make it heaps wide? And then maybe the cars can line up on a bit more of an angle, because it's always fun to see that kind of racy start before, and you see the driver angling towards, he's really cutting it in, you can see some of the psyche there. Maybe that's just an opportunity now to say, well, actually, we could just make it a bit wider.
Yeah, I think there has to be a sense of perspective. I mean, the rule is you've got to be positioned in your grid box, but the rule, the basis for the rule is so that one driver is not advantaged over another. And as Alonso was saying today, that's to do with where you are longitudinally on the grid, not side to side. And both him and Ocon made the mistake of being too far to one side, which doesn't give them an advantage at all. In fact, it's probably a disadvantage, because they'll have started on the dummy grid on the formation lap doing a practice start which would lay down rubber so they've got more grip off the line for the actual start. If they're then in the wrong position for the start, they've probably got a disadvantage rather than advantage. So to then give them a 5-second penalty for that seems a bit silly, really. And it's one of those things, one of those situations where Formula One sometimes finds itself, where it's sort of tied itself in knots unnecessarily, but the rules are the rules and they kind of have to be applied. In this case, common sense was applied, I think, although almost by accident, as it turned out. But anyway.
Well, as both of you say, hopefully we can learn from it, and perhaps, as you suggest, Sam, we could see something totally different on grids in some coming races. When we talk of Aston Martin, of course, taking another podium, we come into Australia, I guess, with more question marks. Can they deliver the performance they have in Bahrain and in Jeddah? When is this going to fade away? I think everyone thinks it's going to stop soon, Andrew. Do you? I
don't think it's going to stop this weekend. Point one is that Fernando Alonso is absolutely brilliant around this racetrack. It's one of his. He is absolutely brilliant, full stop. But he has certain tracks, and he will tell you this himself, where he's just that, he doesn't know why, where he's just that bit better than he is in other places. Singapore is one, he's stunning around Singapore, and this is another one. If we cast our minds back 12 months, he was about to put the Alpine maybe on the front row, certainly on the second row, before the car failed in second qualifying and he ended up having to start further back down the grid. If he can do that in last year's Alpine, I don't think it's realistic that he could challenge the Red Bulls, but I think maybe we could talk about him challenging the Ferraris for being the next fastest car, which so far Charles Leclerc has been in qualifying, at least, not so much in the race. That's a different situation. So I really expect big things from Alonso again this weekend. As the season progresses, we'll have to wait and see. Just one final point on the Aston Martin performance. George Russell was saying that car has looked so far this season, if anything, the quickest car, these are Russell's words, not mine, the quickest car in medium speed corners out of anything. And this track is basically nothing but medium speed corners, apart from the quick chicane round the back. So maybe Alonso can do even better than he's done in the first two races.
Wow, well, we will have to wait and see. Of course, if you cast your mind back 12 months in terms of Aston Martin, that was a terrible weekend.
Yeah, that was a hard one.
Yeah, I spoke to Lance Stroll earlier and he said, we're so excited for this weekend, whereas this time last year it was just a catalogue of errors, really, wasn't it, for that team. But let's hear how Fernando Alonso's feeling heading into the third round of the championship.
Now, Fernando, the car was quick in Bahrain. It was quick in Saudi. Have you seen enough to know that you're going to be quick everywhere this year?
Not yet. I think we have to wait and see. Also, I think very soon from Baku or Imola, we will see the teams changing few parts in the cars, and maybe that changes also the how competitive you feel. So let's wait and see. At the moment, we are extremely happy with the performance of the car. Obviously, he was better than expected, especially in Jeddah. I think it was a nice surprise. So we arrive here with a good level of confidence. But as I said, after a few events from now on, I think the cars will change a lot. In few areas and few developments, so let's see if we can keep this pace.
Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin, definitely a challenger of Red Bull, who seem already to be so dominant, Andrew. Back-to-back 1-2s. Are they going to be miles ahead again this weekend, or is the track not to their liking?
I think everyone expects them to be ahead again. The best car is the best car, and it's a very well-rounded package. I think the most interesting thing about the Saudi Grand Prix was that we saw the first signs of some tension for this season between the Red Bull drivers. If people remember, last season ended quite controversially between Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, when Max wouldn't help Perez in the Brazilian Grand Prix to try and get second in the championship, refused to cede a position to him, and it came out that he believed that Perez had deliberately crashed in Monaco qualifying earlier in the year, which disadvantaged Verstappen. That's still going on in the background, although they're not talking about it anymore. And then we had a conversation over the radio where Verstappen was going for fastest lap at the end of the race and Perez didn't go for fastest lap. He's described that today as a miscommunication between him and his engineer, and he says that within the team everything's good. He would say that, wouldn't he? But it's very clear from what he was saying today. He was pretty punchy, Sergio Perez, about his belief that he can challenge for the championship this year. We know, Sam, don't we, that if he does actually come to challenge for the championship, it's going to get very, very tense in that team, because Max Verstappen believes it's his team and it's his championship to win.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and the more Sergio gets that confidence, the more that steamrolls and snowballs. I mean, arguably that's something that he's not had the opportunity to have until Red Bull in his career. He's put in some unbelievable performances in inferior machinery a lot of the time, but now he's got the best car on the grid. I think we're all in agreement there. And if he can really start to get that confidence snowballing, get the garage to start working well for him on his side, then maybe he's got a chance.
Of course, we're talking about a grudge, really, Andrew. If you go back to Monaco and then obviously Brazil, and still we're talking about it. As a driver, when you've had an issue like that with a teammate, how difficult is it to park it and just move forward? Or are you always going to come back to what happened before?
I think it depends on both the individuals, really. I mean, a lot of the time this is just fantastically output-based work. What do I do to get faster in the car? And it can be as simple as that sometimes. And you don't necessarily need to get along well with your teammate. It's by far and away preferable. It's a nicer place to work, it's a nicer place to be. But if you're able to extract performance out of the car and that relationship side of you is not bothering you, then in many ways that's a mental strength advantage that you have. And I think we've seen Max get on famously with certain teammates, and we've seen them also, sometimes it's been a bit complex at times. And frankly, he's done well either way, and that just starts to speak to what you're going up against when you are going up against a Max Verstappen. It is a battle on the track, it is a battle of the mind, and you've got to respect that.
Do you think Christian is ready for dealing with this? Christian Horner, team principal of Red Bull.
Well, I asked Perez that exact question earlier today, and he kind of brushed it off a bit, and I'm sure that Horner himself would say, everything's fine. But the reality is that there have been times at Red Bull over the years where they have had problems with teammates. They had it with Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber in the early 2010s. That got extremely tense for a while. They had it with Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen in the later part of the 2010s decade. Ricciardo ended up leaving the team because he believed he wasn't going to get a fair crack with Verstappen there. Now we've got Perez coming in. Perez was saying that before he arrived, they were basically running two cars because they had to. Now he doesn't feel it's like that anymore. He feels he's got the belief within the team, the backing that he needs. There's other questions that will arise. Last year, as the Red Bull car developed, it developed very much in the way that Max Verstappen wanted it to go. Again, I asked Perez, has he got any concerns about that this year? He said at this stage, no, he doesn't. He believes that at the moment they're both asking for the same thing. Let's be frank, Rosanna, we need this tension within Red Bull, because if it's just going to be Verstappen, we're all going to get very bored of this season very quickly.
We need the drivers to ignore the rules set out by the team. We need the team to mismanage it. We need it all to go wrong, and for Christian Horner to get perhaps more and more frustrated with his misbehaving drivers. Well, let's hear how Checo Perez is feeling heading into the Australian Grand Prix off the back of his win in Saudi Arabia. I just wondered what clarification you'd received from the team after the last few laps of Saudi with the fastest lap fiasco.
Yeah, I think it was all clear. It's been all amplified by the media in a way, so it's all clear by the team, and I think I got the right information at the time, and probably we should have had a go to go for the fastest lap, but I hope 1 point doesn't make the difference in the end.
Oh, let's hope not.
Yeah.
But are you happy though in the future if you're told to hold station, you're going to do that? Are you always going to be a bit like, but is Max going to?
No, I think we're going to be in that boat, and we're going to be both doing the same thing.
People say you're driving better than ever. I just wondered which area of your driving you feel you need to improve if you are going to beat Max in the same machinery.
I think I got to be keeping this level of driving throughout the 20 races left, or 21 races, and that will be the key, and that's the most difficult as a driver, to be able to maintain that level without making mistakes weekend after weekend, and making sure that we learn from our mistakes. Even though we won last race, there are things that we can still do better.
I'm Rosanna Tennant, and I'm joined by BBC Sports chief F1 writer Andrew Benson and Australian F1 reporter and former racing driver Sam Power here in the Melbourne paddock. And people are starting to head off. We've got music playing in the background. There's a real feel-good factor going on here. Even though it's not the start of the season, people are really excited to be racing here in Australia.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love coming to this event. I was a fan here, I've raced here, I've worked in the paddock here, so it's always a special one for me to come back to, for sure. And it's just a piece of Australia. We love it, and it's a great aspect to bring to Formula One.
Yeah, the Melburnians really welcome Formula One with both hands. Let's turn our attention to Mercedes and Ferrari now. Well, Lewis Hamilton described the Red Bull as the fastest car he'd seen, especially compared to the rest, Andrew, as we've got a wonderful flyover now as well, really adding to the
bad for a Thursday, is it?
No, exactly. All the bells and whistles going on. Lewis is, I imagine, in admiration on one side of the Red Bull car, and obviously also wanting to chase them on track. Where are Mercedes as we head into this weekend, Andrew?
Well, basically where they've been for the first two races. they've accepted that the car's not where they want it to be. They've accepted they need to make some major changes to it, but it's going to take some time for those changes to come. Hamilton was quite interesting today. In fact, both Hamilton and Russell effectively admitted it was going to take a long time. Russell said he wasn't overly optimistic about the prospects for the season. Hamilton was sort of saying it's going to take at least to the end of the year before they can catch Red Bull. He was also talking, Hamilton, about the characteristics of the car and how difficult he was finding it, and I think he probably gave away a bit more information than the Mercedes engineers might have wanted him to.
Were you scribbling away frantically?
Yeah, because he was talking about aerodynamic balance and how that shifts through the corner and how it's not giving him what he wants, and the car's too on the nose and this does that, and we're seated too far forward, we sit much further forward than anybody else in our car, and that completely changes how we how you feel the car on corner entry. And he basically expanded on that comment that he gave to you, Rosanna, in Bahrain, when he said that they didn't listen to him.
The big comment that sent the paddock into a spin.
Yeah, and which he kind of rode back on but didn't when he got to Saudi Arabia. He was basically talking about this seating position and said, that if I'd known it was going to be like this, it wouldn't have happened. In other words, they've got it wrong. So that they can't change this year, the seating position. Other things in the car they can, but how far can they get with that? We don't know yet.
My question on all of this listening to me or not listening to me thing, Andrew, is, okay, there was a couple of months off, winter break. They're all still in touch. There's no, at the moment, there will be a sort of shutdown over Christmas. So if Lewis was feeding all this information into the machine, wouldn't you be checking in over Christmas, being like, by the way, do you remember what I asked for? Is it working? Why has it got to this stage?
Well, we're talking about major car construction problems here. So they would have made a decision. If you think about where is the driver going to sit in the chassis? The chassis of a Formula One car is defined pretty early in a given season. So this weekend it's going to turn into April. It's about the time of the year when they're laying down the chassis of the car. So they will have to have made that decision this time last year. Now they knew they had some problems with last year's car, but at this time last year they were trying to fix what we were all talking about last year, which was bouncing or porpoising. That they felt was a floor issue, not a seating position issue, and they were right about that.
And they still believed in the concept then as well.
But they still believed, that's absolutely right, what Sam says, in the general fundamental concept of the car they still thought was right. They now realise that was wrong, but they wouldn't have known that then. So you can't blame them for that, I think. But it's not just about that. The seating position defines the side impact structures, which stick out from the Mercedes. That defines the side pod shape. I don't know what came first. Did the seating position define the side impact structures, which define the side pods, or did they see the side pod shape and that led to the side impact structures and that led to the cockpit position? I don't know where that all starts. What was the chicken? What was the egg? But we can't blame them for that right now. But what we can say is that they've finally accepted they've got it wrong in a fundamental way, and they need to fix it. They're saying they're seeing big steps forward in performance, but of course those take time to come on stream.
Well, I spoke to Lewis about those performance changes, some of the promising signs that his team boss Toto Wolff has been talking about, and this is what Lewis had to say. Over the course of the Saudi weekend, you seemed a bit down. Maybe that was for obvious reasons, but I just wondered where you're drawing your positivity and your energy from at the moment.
I don't remember so much. I don't remember being down in Saudi. If I was, I think it's ultimately the kind of the whole vibe of being in Saudi, right? Is so many people are uncomfortable being there, and I think kind of just going there, it's just not I'm not like, hey, I'm happy to be here. But then you put your head down and you just get on with the job. And I think generally the weekend it wasn't easy. I struggled. I was losing half a second, I think it was, in the first sector, which I've never really ever had there. I've qualified pole there in the past. And at the end of the weekend, I thought that there's this setup change that we can make, which you can only do it on a Friday night, and Saturday you have it and you're stuck with it basically. And so it's a real shot in the dark. Like if it works, it's great, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. And sometimes I do it and it works, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes George did a fantastic job, and I wasn't taking anything away from him. I was just like, I was struggling so much with understeer. If I had gone that way, I would have had understeer. And but it could have been that he had a lot of rear degradation because it was so oversteer. So anyways, but I was happy. I think I got everything I could get from it, and I got points. We got good team points. Fifth, I think, given where our car is, I think it was quite good, and we're second in the Constructor Championship currently, so I was positive when I left.
Toto has been saying that there are some promising signs coming from the factory. What does that actually mean?
I don't really know.
Oh. Have they shown
it's
you?
All like top secret stuff, like it's I don't know. He's on the phone to all the engineers every single day, chasing them. I think there's things that they're naturally trying in the wind tunnel, but everyone's developing. So I guess the worry always is if we need to take bigger steps. So if they're doing 2/10, we need to be doing 4/10. We need to be really chipping away at that gap that we have. But I know that everyone's just working super focused, giving it absolutely everything. So I've been and seen that, and that inspires me coming to my weekends, knowing that I've got the best team behind me that are going to get it done.
So what about Ferrari? Let's turn our attention to the Scarlet cars. It almost looked like there was a little upturn in performance, especially on Charles' side of the garage. Obviously, he had that penalty, Sam, that he was going to have to serve. But he was right up at the front end, qualifying in P2. Do you think they're making a step forward, or is it too early to tell?
Yeah, they definitely haven't made as much of a step forward as they would have liked to over the winter. And to a degree, it's been somewhat turbulent. Obviously, a major leadership change is always going to be difficult for a team to adapt to. So I think once they've found their footing with that and they can start to get some continuity, and again, I see a lot of this as confidence. If you're going to start to think about how do I take the fight to Red Bull, how do I take the fight to Aston, all of a sudden I've got to have better pit stops, I've got to have better confidence in that. There's a couple of radio messages as well there. Charles and the engineers are sort of just trying to figure out still what's the kind of messages I need to deliver to the driver and when. What do I need? These are all things that it's just teamwork.
Speak louder, Sam.
Sorry.
No, not at all.
Trying to fight some aeroplanes.
Yes, exactly.
But I think it just speaks to a lot of... They still need to just figure out a lot of gelling and what each other needs in the right moments. And when you start to get that, the team will just start to be able to take the fight to these top echelons, being Aston and Red Bull at the moment. And when they do that, I don't think we can write them off so much. And it's what we want to see. We want them to put pressure on Red Bull. We can't have Red Bull going away with this and being able to make mistakes and still win. We want them to be able to be capitalised on by other teams.
If we look back to this time last year, Andrew, Ferrari were looking so strong. Charles qualifying on pole, taking the win. But it was almost after that it all started to come undone.
Yeah, he left this race last year 46 points clear of Max Verstappen, but that gap evaporated within 3 races, which just goes to show how quickly things imploded at Ferrari. I mean, to be fair to Ferrari, their car is quicker than last year. The Mercedes car is also quicker than last year. The problem is that the Red Bull is even quicker than that.
You take a step on, someone else takes 2.
They've made the job of work that Red Bull have done with this car is hugely impressive in terms of their progress from one year to the next. And it was already a brilliant car last year. I think my personal opinion about Ferrari at the moment is that we're seeing Leclerc flattering the car in qualifying, and often that can happen. You get extra grip from new tyres on one lap on one qualifying lap, which can compensate for a car's overall lack of performance in certain circumstances. And Leclerc has been outstanding in both qualifying sessions this year. I think he was miles ahead of Carlos Sainz in Jeddah. But as soon as they get into the race, they get high tyre degradation. And to me, that speaks of a car that just doesn't have enough downforce. The tyre grip in qualifying can compensate for that for a lap, but then because it's not got enough downforce, the car slides more than the other cars, the tyres overheat, and then it loses performance, and it just goes backwards. I think that's what we're seeing with the Ferrari. So they basically just need to get some more downforce on the car. If they can do that, then maybe they can start to race in a position where they're qualifying. At the moment, there's no sign that that's going to happen. this weekend any more than it did in the last 2 weekends. Leclerc thinks he can qualify at the front, close to the front again, but I don't think he'll be able to hold off Alonso in the race in the Aston Martin, and maybe not the Mercedes either. We'll have to see.
Well, let's see if it's going to be another difficult Sunday for Charles Leclerc. He was talking to the media earlier on.
I mean, I don't want to focus on the past. Of course, last year was really good memories, and it's good to come back to a place where you have good memories, but we also need to be very, very realistic, and we are far away from the performance we were, or from the position we were in last year coming into the race. Our package for now is probably not good enough to win for this weekend, and we are aware of it. But that absolutely doesn't mean that we are not motivated to return the situation as quickly as possible, and I know there are quite a lot of upgrades coming to the car in the next few months, and this should help us to close the gap.
It's time to talk about the team in papaya, McLaren, making quite a few headlines of late, Andrew, with a bit of a reshuffle and a restructure at the team, with, I guess, the key headline, their technical director, James Key, leaving the team.
Yes, they've had a terrible start to the season, McLaren. They're last in the Constructors' Championship with no points, and they definitely didn't expect that. I mean, they did come into the season knowing they were on the back foot. They realised that they'd missed some development direction with the car, and they admitted that at the launch. So you sort of everyone was
early.
Like we turn up at the McLaren Technical Centre in February. You're expecting a team to talk about optimism and we can do this, we can do that. Instead, they just said, look, we're not where we wanted to be.
In a way, I admire the honesty, rather than kind of pretending that it was all fine.
But I think it reveals how much of a mess they realised they were in. To be fair to them, their performance hasn't been as bad as last place in the Constructors' Championship, but various things have happened. Lando Norris crashed in qualifying in Saudi Arabia. They've had some bad luck.
He called it shoulda, woulda, coulda this afternoon. There was a lot of shoulda, woulda, coulda.
Oscar Piastri lost his front wing at the first corner in Jeddah, and then Norris ran over it, so that took out both of them. Things like that have gone wrong.
This is the most brilliant air show. If only this was TV and I could show you it. It's rather relentless, actually, is what I'm going to call it.
Yeah, let's just be glad that they don't have that thing that comes over on Sunday morning. They have this.
More sensory overload for Andrew.
People who've not been to the Australian Grand Prix, and I realise that we're in a very fortunate position, Rosanna, you and I, to be here. As Sam, you're Australian, so you're excused. There's a fighter jet that flies over. And I've taken to asking when it's going to fly over, so I can be inside because it's so deafening, and they do it deliberately to surprise you. I think it's
just you actually.
You don't want to be holding a hot cup of coffee when that thing goes over, do you? You really don't. Or a red wine.
Your flat white goes everywhere.
I digress, but yeah. So I think Zach Brown, the CEO of McLaren Racing, he realised last year that things weren't going in the way that he wanted them to go. They weren't developing as fast as they wanted to develop. The team wasn't moving forward as quickly as he wanted them to. The writing was on the wall for James Key then. Andreas Seidel, the team principal, left to go to Sauber, which will become Audi. Alfa Romeo, which is effectively Sauber, which will become Audi in 2026. And that gave them the opportunity for a major restructure. Andrea Stella was the new team principal. He's instigated this new structure, which actually on the surface looks a bit like a structure they had 10 years or so ago, which they abandoned with 3 technical leaders. Stella was saying today the only thing that actually is the same as then is that there are 3 leaders. He said the problem then was that the roles weren't defined. Now the roles are very defined in terms of the areas of performance those 3 people are focused on. It's going to take time for that structure to bed down, and it's overlapping with some sort of big infrastructure changes that are happening at Williams, a new wind tunnel, for example, a new simulator. Let's see how it goes.
Well, there is a question, isn't there, of whether this creates instability in the short term for stability in the long term, Sam. How difficult is it when you're trying to get out on track and perform with a car that is pretty tricky, and all that's going on in the background, and probably the likes of you and I are thrusting a microphone in their faces, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, saying, what's going on? Is the technical reshuffle? It's a bit of a distraction, no?
Yeah, it's hard for the drivers for sure. I think going to Andrew's point, a lot of what we're seeing here is a byproduct of the cost cap, and effectively now the priority is that you need to be incredibly efficient with your spend, whereas before you could hide that by spending money. So it's interesting now that people are having to look at these processes, the management, the structures, the hierarchies, for the most efficient way to extract what you've got from your resources at your factory. And for different teams, that's an enormously different challenge. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a Mercedes model will work in a Red Bull factory, or vice versa, or that for Williams, etc. So it is a big distraction for the drivers. Ultimately, though, when you do put the visor down, you do tend to forget a lot about those things, and you just go back to basics, and you just trust what your engineers said to you and work on yourself, and you try and deliver your performances. But the hardest thing is staying motivated when you're not achieving good results, and building that confidence in yourself when you're racing for 7s and 8s. It's nothing like doing that for 1st and 2nds.
Well, let's hear how Lando Norris is feeling heading into this weekend. Back in Bahrain, he was saying he was focusing on his own driving style while the car was difficult to drive. Let's hear how he's feeling ahead of this weekend's Grand Prix. We've heard this morning that the team are focusing on a B-spec car for the mid-season. Is that good enough for you, do you think? That far off?
B-spec car? I guess, I don't know about a B-spec car. I know that we just bring upgrades when we can, and there's certain races we're trying to aim them for. Obviously, Baku is the obvious one that we've spoken about. I don't know what defines a B-spec car. If it's something that Andrea has said, or Zach has said, then probably believe them more than me. But I guess we're always trying to bring upgrades. We're always trying to bring things to improve the car. Some bigger ones, some smaller ones. So if that defines a B-spec car, then that's probably true. We've got big gaps we need to make up. It's not just 2/10 or 1/10. It's half a second, 1 second to where we want to be. So. We're trying as hard as we can. There's obviously making some big changes here and there to bring those steps that we need. But it's about producing that and actually bringing it to the car rather than just having it on paper in the beginning. So, we're working hard as we can to make those steps forward.
And obviously the news about the shuffle of your technical department, a different structure to pretty much all the teams here in Formula One. Does that give you confidence, or actually is it going to bring a bit of instability, and is it actually what you really need at this stage?
I think if anything it's brought more stability, more confidence in the whole team. I have a lot of faith and a lot of belief in Andrea and the work that he does. Obviously worked very closely with him over the last 5-6 years, as long as I've been in Formula One. And I really believe he's one of the best guys for his position and best guys to have on your team. So I'm very happy with his decisions, what he's been working on. At the same time with Zach, Zach's the best. I don't want to believe, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but the best in what he does at the same time. So no, I think it's only brought the team more confidence, more belief that we can make the steps forward that we need to do.
On the other side of the McLaren garage, of course, there is the home hero, Oscar Piastri. But Sam, do Australians feel like Oscar is Australian? Because obviously he's lived in the UK for quite some time now. So are they kind of trying to get to know him this weekend, do you think?
I mean, yes, they are, and they absolutely consider him an Australian. I think that's the one thing that we love doing as Aussies. We embrace any Aussie sportsman that is wearing that flag anywhere in the world. And Formula One's always had a special relationship with Australia, especially in the Adelaide Grand Prix, Melbourne here now. And so I think, everyone will be definitely buying a lot of papaya this year and supporting him. No, not the fruit. Although maybe also the fruit. I don't know. But
that would be a weird fan tradition, wouldn't it? Andrew, we know that being a home hero, a driver racing at home, it has sort of two sides to it. There's the crowd support, which I think there are just headlines everywhere about Oscar Piastri. If the crowd could promote him up the grid, he'd be on the podium right now. But there's also an amount of pressure, especially when you're a rookie, isn't there?
Well, yes, it's interesting actually that Piastri was saying today that he's been leaning on his manager Mark Webber, who knows that very well. And actually, Mark handled the pressure here really badly. I don't think he would mind me saying that. I think he actually did really well in his debut race here for Minardi back in 2002. But when he got into a quick car with Red Bull, it just never seemed to work out for him in Melbourne. He'd make a mistake or something would go wrong or whatever. So I'm sure that Mark, who's a very wily character, will have been giving Oscar Piastri the benefit of his experience of those situations. And it was interesting to hear Piastri say that they've actually tried to keep the public appearances under control a bit this week. Yeah. And I think that will be a learning that Webber took, because the Australian public, understandably, wanted as much Mark Webber as they could get.
We saw that with Daniel Ricciardo as well, didn't we, on the start-finish straight?
He was another one who had problems dealing with the home pressure. I can only imagine what it's like being...
Are you not asked for autographs?
Australia is just such a sports-mad country, isn't it, Sam? I can imagine being the one person. It's one thing when you're a member of an 11-man cricket team, for example, but the one person for a weekend that the entire country is focused on. Imagine what that's like.
Yeah, intense.
Absolutely. I mean, they sometimes have 3 breakfasts, 7 dinners and 14 other appearances that they've got to do during the day. And you've got to think, they've got a day job to do in between that. And it's very difficult when you've got all of that going around in your head, and particularly if it's foreign to them as well. So I think Mark, very rightfully, is doing the right thing here, but because he wants him to be in the sport for 20 years to come. So there'll always be another opportunity down the road. He doesn't want this to be the one and only because everything got to him. And thankfully, though, Oscar is remarkably resilient to pressure, which has been fantastic to see. So we have high hopes for him.
And super relaxed. I caught up with him a little earlier on, so let's hear how Oscar's feeling heading into his home race. Oscar Piastri, home hero. What is it like being in Melbourne ahead of your first home Grand Prix?
Yeah, very exciting to be at home again, and this time obviously racing as well. So nice to be back. Nice to see my friends and family, and to have Albert Park turned into a racetrack is cool, and to be knowing I'm going to be driving around it for the first time tomorrow is even cooler.
Tell me what Melbourne Walk was like. How long did it take you to get up the Melbourne Walk and into the paddock?
Probably about 15 minutes today, and that's a Thursday, so the rest of the weekend's going to be nuts. But I'm loving it. Even last year it was already pretty nuts as a reserve driver. So yeah, it'll be cool. Nice to see all the fans there in Papaya as well, for the most part, which was cool. So it's nice to have them all there.
And has Mark Webber, your manager, been protecting you in a sort of way to make sure that you're ready on Sunday afternoon?
In some ways, yes. I think obviously Mark's got a lot of experience as a driver himself of how crazy the Australian Grand Prix week can be, because it's not really a weekend for the home drivers. So we've been managing that very well. Obviously the team have got experience with Daniel in the last couple of years as well. So I think from all fronts we're managing it well. I'm sure there'll be things we can maybe adjust, but there's some things you just don't know until you've done it for the first time.
And just finally, obviously the car is a little tricky to drive at the moment, but have you guys made any progress over the last week? Obviously a big shuffle behind the scenes in the technical department, but how confident are you that you might have a car to fight up at the front end fairly soon?
Of course we're hopeful. I think this weekend probably won't be too much different to the first two. I think the track layout and the tarmac is probably more similar to Saudi, which I think will suit us a bit better, hopefully. I'm not expecting to be massively further forward. I think Baku will be a step in the right direction for that, but it'll be the first step in what I think will be more steps needed. And of course everyone else will be bringing upgrades to their cars as well. So we'll try our best this weekend. I think we can definitely try and fight for the back end of points, but it certainly won't be easy.
Enjoy your first home Grand Prix.
I will, thank you.
A big weekend for Oscar Piastri as the crowd sort of fills the grandstands. I've been for a little walk around the track. There is so much space to fill in Albert Park, and I think we are going to get the Grand Prix circuit filled. Andrew's just checking the weather there.
I just feel some rain on my
True Melburnian style, 4 seasons in a day, and we have had rain. And actually, on a side note, Lewis Hamilton said he's kind of hoping for some rain, but I think Sunday's meant to be set fair. But on that note, gentlemen, as you've got raindrops on your notepad, I'd love your predictions for this weekend. Who would like to go first? Maybe Andrew.
I think I can't see past Red Bull winning, but maybe Verstappen. You always have to back Verstappen out of those two drivers, however well Perez did. But I just think Alonso might do something special as well.
Okay, as long as he doesn't end up upside down.
I think it's going to be an interesting battle between Aston and Ferrari. This track generally produces what we would call negative deg, so you tend to actually get faster with the fuel load burning off. We saw that with Alex Albon, for example.
The hard tyre.
The tyre whisperer of the Albert Park Grand Prix
absolutely.
circuit. What was that, 56 laps, I think it was. I caught up with him yesterday, actually, about it. It was good fun. So I think and as Andrew said earlier on, you know, the Ferrari having a bit of problems with the DEG and a bit of problems with that downforce aspect, then hopefully the Ferrari can take a bit of a fight to the Aston as well. But I think, that start will be pretty spicy down into turn 1, so very much looking forward to that as well.
So your podium, you haven't given me a podium.
I haven't had you. Sorry, my apologies.
No,
Okay, so I'm going to go
remiss.
Verstappen P1. I'm then going to go Fernando Alonso and Sergio, I think. Yeah,
In that order?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. And Andrew,
Have a little battle.
You didn't really give me your podium, did you?
I didn't hear you ask me for a podium, Rosanna.
What predictions?
You want a podium? I don't know. Let's say one of the Rebels will retire.
Okay,
So let's go
interesting.
Verstappen, Alonso, Leclerc.
Okay, nice. 3 constructors on the podium. I like it. Thank you so much for your predictions. Enjoy the Australian Grand Prix weekend. We'll be catching up throughout it. The Grand Prix gets underway at 6 a.m. UK time on Sunday. You can listen to live commentary of that on 5 Live, and you can also listen to live commentary of qualifying and every practice session across the weekend on the 5 Live network. We'll be back with your post-qualifying Checkered Flag podcast on Saturday. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.